The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered for the daily changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old construction worker from Detroit who had saved for 3 years to bring his family to London. His wife Sarah held their 8-year-old daughter Emma's hand tightly as they pushed through the sea of people trying to get a better view. Marcus had always been fascinated by British history. Growing up, he watched every documentary about the royal family and dreamed of seeing the famous guards in their red coats and tall black hats. This trip was supposed to be the highlight of their vacation, a memory his daughter would treasure forever. As the ceremony began, the crowd pressed forward. Marcus found himself just a few feet away from one of the guards standing at attention. The guard was young, probably in his early 20s, with a stoic expression that seemed carved from stone. His rifle was held perfectly straight, his eyes staring ahead without blinking. Emma tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why won't he look at us?" she whispered. "They're trained not to move or talk, sweetheart," Marcus explained quietly. "It's their job to stand perfectly still." But as minutes passed, Marcus noticed something that made his heart race. The guard's hands were trembling slightly. At first, he thought it might be the weight of the rifle, but then he saw beads of sweat forming on the young man's forehead despite the cool morning air. The guard's breathing seemed shallow, almost labored. Other tourists began to notice too. A teenager with a phone started recording, hoping to catch the guard breaking his composure. An elderly British woman tutted disapprovingly at the guard's apparent weakness. The whispers grew louder. "Look at him shaking," someone said with a laugh. "These guards aren't what they used to be," another tourist commented. Marcus felt something twist in his stomach. This wasn't right. Something was wrong with the guard, but people were treating it like entertainment. The young soldier's face had gone pale, and his jaw was clenched tight as if he was fighting some internal battle. Without thinking, Marcus stepped forward. His wife called his name, but he ignored her. The crowd around him grew quiet as he approached, the guard who was still standing rigidly at attention despite his obvious distress. "Hey there, soldier," Marcus said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You look like you're having a rough morning." The guard's eyes flickered for just a moment, but he maintained his position. The crowd began to murmur, some people pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be an amusing interaction. Marcus raised his voice, putting on an exaggerated American accent. "What's the matter, buddy? Can't handle a little standing around? We've got mall cops back home who could do better than this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several British tourists looked horrified at the American's rudeness. A security guard started moving through the crowd toward Marcus, but he continued. "Come on, give us a smile. You're supposed to be tough, right? The famous British Royal Guards." Marcus waved his arms dramatically. "My daughter could stand straighter." "Then you?" The young guard's knuckles were white where he gripped his rifle. Sweat was now visible on his temples, and his breathing had become even more shallow. But still he held his position with determination that spoke of years of training and discipline. "Marcus, stop it," Sarah hissed, grabbing at her husband's arm. She was mortified by his behavior, unable to understand why her usually respectful husband was acting like such a tourist stereotype. But Marcus wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone and held it up as if to take a selfie with the distressed guard. "This is going straight to Facebook, buddy. American tourist breaks British guard. This'll get me 1 million likes." The crowd was now completely focused on the spectacle. Some people were laughing nervously. Others looked genuinely angry at Marcus's disrespectful behavior. A few tourists had their phones out, recording what they thought was just another ignorant American making a fool of himself abroad. The security guard was almost through the crowd now, his hand moving toward his radio. The situation was escalating quickly, and it looked like Marcus was about to be forcibly removed from the area. Emma started crying, confused and embarrassed by her father's sudden change in behavior. Sarah tried to comfort her daughter while simultaneously attempting to pull her husband away from the scene he was creating. "Please, Marcus, let's just go," she pleaded. "You're making a scene. This isn't like you." But Marcus stood his ground, continuing his apparent harassment of the young guard. What nobody in the crowd realized was that Marcus had seen something in the soldier's eyes that others had missed. Behind the training and discipline, behind the stoic mask of duty, there was something else entirely. Something that reminded Marcus of his own younger brother. Something that made him act against every instinct of politeness and respect he possessed. The guard swayed slightly, so subtly that most people didn't notice. But Marcus saw it and his heart pounded with recognition. Time was running out, and his unconventional plan was the only thing he could think of to help. The security guard finally reached Marcus, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you need to step back immediately. This behavior is completely unacceptable." Marcus could see the young guard was getting worse. The trembling had spread from his hands to his entire body, though he fought valiantly to control it. His face had gone from pale to an alarming grayish color, and his eyes had taken on a glassy appearance that Marcus recognized all too well. "I'm not going anywhere until this guy acknowledges me," Marcus declared loudly, shrugging off the security guard's hand. "What kind of customer service is this? I paid good money to come here." The crowd around them had grown larger. Tourists from various countries watched with fascination and disgust as the loud American continued his verbal assault on the helpless guard. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Shame on you!" while others continued filming, already planning to post the footage online with captions about ugly American tourists. Sarah was beside herself with embarrassment and confusion. This wasn't the man she had married. Marcus was usually quiet and respectful, the kind of person who said please and thank you to everyone and always held doors open for strangers. She couldn't understand what had gotten into him. "Daddy, why are you being mean?" Emma sobbed, clinging to her mother's leg. The security guard spoke into his radio requesting backup. "We have a situation with an unruly tourist harassing one of the guards. American male, approximately 6 feet tall. Brown hair, blue jacket." Marcus heard the radio call but didn't care. He was watching the guard's eyes, and what he saw there made his own hands shake. The young man's pupils were dilated, and there was a distant look that Marcus had seen before in his brother's eyes during the worst moments of his illness. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Marcus shouted, stepping even closer to the guard. "What's your name, soldier boy? Don't you have any manners?" The guard's breathing was becoming more labored. A thin film of sweat covered his entire face now, and his grip on the rifle seemed less steady. But his training held firm. He stared straight ahead, not acknowledging the harassment in any way. An elderly British gentleman in the crowd couldn't take it anymore. "This is absolutely disgraceful," he called out. "Someone needs to remove this man immediately. He's showing complete disrespect to our traditions and our servicemen." More voices joined in, creating a chorus of disapproval aimed at Marcus. The mood of the crowd had shifted from curiosity to genuine anger. Several people were now recording, and Marcus could hear comments about posting the videos to social media to shame him. But Marcus pressed on, his voice getting louder and more obnoxious. "What's wrong with you, buddy? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just scared of a real American? We saved your country twice, you know." The historical inaccuracy and crude nationalism made several British tourists visibly angry. Someone threw a wadded-up tissue at Marcus, which bounced off his shoulder. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. 2 more security guards arrived on the scene, pushing through the crowd with determined expressions. It was clear they intended to physically remove Marcus from the area, possibly even arrest him for disturbing the peace and harassment. "Sir, this is your final warning," the lead security guard announced. "You will cease this behavior immediately and come with us, or you will be forcibly removed and charged." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm desperately. "Please, honey, think about Emma. Think about what you're doing." "This isn't you?" But Marcus barely heard her. All his attention was focused on the young guard, who had now begun swaying more noticeably. The soldier's training was the only thing keeping him upright, but Marcus could see it was a losing battle. The young man's face had gone completely white, and his eyes were starting to lose focus. Marcus knew he had perhaps seconds left before either the security guards dragged him away, or something much worse happened to the soldier. He made a decision that would shock everyone present. Suddenly, Marcus lunged forward as if he was going to physically confront the guard. The crowd gasped in horror. Phones captured every moment, and the security guards rushed toward him. But instead of attacking, Marcus positioned himself directly in front of the young soldier. "You're okay," he whispered urgently, so quietly that only the guard could hear him. "I see what's happening. You're having a medical episode. It's not your fault." The guard's eyes widened slightly, the first real reaction he had shown throughout the entire ordeal. For a split second, confusion and gratitude flickered across his face before the professional mask reasserted itself. The security guards were almost on them now. The crowd was shouting various things, some calling for Marcus to be arrested, others demanding he step away from the soldier. The chaos was reaching a crescendo, and it seemed like violence was inevitable. But Marcus had achieved what he had set out to do. He had created enough of a distraction and gotten close enough to assess the situation properly. What happened next would depend entirely on his quick thinking and the courage of a young soldier who was fighting a battle no one else could see. Just as the security guards reached Marcus, the young guard finally collapsed. His knees buckled and he crumpled to the ground, his rifle clattering against the stone pavement. The ceremonial bearskin hat rolled away as his body convulsed in what was clearly a severe medical emergency. The crowd's anger toward Marcus instantly transformed into shock and concern. Phones that had been recording his harassment were now capturing a young soldier in the throes of what appeared to be a serious seizure. His body shook violently and foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. Marcus immediately dropped to his knees beside the fallen guard, his obnoxious tourist persona disappearing completely. His voice became calm and authoritative as years of first aid training from his construction job kicked in. "Everyone back up. Give him space," Marcus commanded, and something in his tone made people obey without question. "Someone call an ambulance now. This is a medical emergency." The security guards, who had been ready to arrest Marcus seconds before, now looked uncertain. One of them spoke rapidly into his radio. "We need medical assistance immediately. One of the guards has collapsed and appears to be having a seizure." Marcus carefully positioned himself to protect the young soldier's head from hitting the stone pavement. "It's okay, son. You're going to be all right," he said softly, his earlier rudeness replaced by genuine compassion. Sarah pushed through the crowd with Emma, finally understanding that something much more serious was happening. She knelt beside her husband, her nursing background from before Emma was born suddenly relevant again. "Is it epilepsy?" she asked quietly, checking the soldier's pulse at his wrist. "I think so," Marcus replied, gently holding the young man's head steady. "But there might be more to it. Look at his medical alert bracelet." Sarah squinted at the thin silver bracelet on the guard's wrist. "Type 1 diabetes," she read aloud. "Oh no, Marcus. This could be a diabetic seizure." The crowd around them had grown silent except for worried murmurs. The other guards in the ceremony had been notified and were maintaining their positions, but their eyes showed deep concern for their fallen colleague. Several tourists were openly crying, struck by the sudden shift from entertainment to genuine human crisis. Marcus continued talking to the unconscious soldier in low, reassuring tones. "What's your name, buddy? Can you hear me? You're safe now. Help is coming." An elderly woman in the crowd stepped forward. "His name is James," she said quietly. "James Mitchell. He's my neighbor's son. Such a sweet boy. He was diagnosed with diabetes when he was 12. Marcus felt his heart clench. James looked so young lying there, probably barely out of his teens. The seizure was beginning to subside, but the young man remained unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. "James, if you can hear me, you're going to be okay," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "Your blood sugar dropped too low, but we're going to fix that. Just hold on." Sarah had found James's emergency glucose kit in a small pouch on his uniform belt. "Marcus, help me get this under his tongue," she instructed, opening a small tube of glucose gel. As they worked to administer the emergency glucose, sirens could be heard approaching in the distance. The crowd parted automatically to create a clear path for the incoming ambulance. "Why didn't he break position?" someone in the crowd asked. "If he was feeling sick, why didn't he just step aside?" An older man who appeared to be a military veteran answered solemnly, "Training. These lads are trained to never abandon their post no matter what. The discipline is so ingrained that even when his body was shutting down, he held his position." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes as he continued to monitor James's vital signs. The young soldier had been suffering in silence, fighting his body's betrayal while maintaining the dignity and discipline expected of a royal guard. And Marcus had recognized the signs because his own brother had lived with type 1 diabetes for 15 years. He was trying so hard to hold on, Marcus whispered to Sarah. He knew something was wrong, but he wouldn't break character. The dedication, It's incredible and terrifying at the same time. The paramedics arrived and quickly took over James's care. As they worked to stabilize his blood sugar and check his vital signs, one of them looked up at Marcus with curiosity. "Were you the one who administered the glucose gel?" the paramedic asked. Marcus nodded. "My wife did most of it. She's a nurse. We both recognized the signs of diabetic shock. Good work. You probably prevented serious brain damage or worse. How did you know what was happening?" Marcus glanced around at the crowd that was still watching intently. Many of the people who had been angry with him just minutes before were now looking at him with confusion and dawning understanding. "My brother has type 1 diabetes," Marcus explained simply. "I've seen this before. I knew James was in trouble, but he wasn't going to break position. Someone had to do something." The pieces were starting to fall into place for the onlookers. Marcus's apparently cruel harassment was beginning to make sense in a completely different light, but the full truth of what he had done and why was still yet to be revealed. As the paramedics loaded James onto a stretcher, he began to regain consciousness. His eyes fluttered open and he looked around in confusion at the faces surrounding him. When his gaze fell on Marcus, recognition flickered across his features. You were the one," James whispered weakly, his voice hoarse from the ordeal. Marcus leaned closer to the stretcher. "How are you feeling, son?" "Better," James managed, though he still looked extremely pale. "But I don't understand. You seemed so angry with me." The crowd had pressed closer to hear this exchange, and Marcus realized this was his moment to explain what had really happened. He looked around at all the faces, some still showing confusion, others beginning to show understanding, and a few displaying shame at their earlier reactions. "I wasn't angry with you, James," Marcus said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I was trying to help you. My brother Tommy has type 1 diabetes, and I recognized the signs of what was happening to you. The trembling, the sweating, the pale complexion. You were going into diabetic shock." A murmur went through the crowd as people began to process this information. Several tourists looked down at their phones, suddenly uncomfortable with the footage they had recorded of what they thought was harassment. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "I knew you wouldn't break your position no matter what. The discipline of the Royal Guards is legendary. But I also knew that if your blood sugar kept dropping, you could have died standing there. Someone had to do something to get close enough to help when you collapsed." Sarah stepped forward, addressing the crowd directly. "My husband created a distraction to get the attention of security and medical personnel. He knew James was going to collapse, and he wanted to make sure someone would be there to help immediately." One of the security guards who had been ready to arrest Marcus now looked ashamed. "Sir, I owe you an apology. We thought you were just another rude tourist causing trouble." "No need to apologize," Marcus replied. "You were doing your job. And honestly, I probably looked like every stereotype of an obnoxious American tourist. That was intentional." The elderly British woman who had originally criticized Marcus stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I called you disgraceful. I had no idea what you were really doing." Marcus shook his head gently. "You couldn't have known. I needed everyone to think I was being disrespectful, so that when James collapsed, there would already be security and attention focused on our area. If I had just stood there quietly, he might have fallen and hit his head on the stone with no one ready to help." James, who had been listening to this exchange from the stretcher, tried to sit up slightly. "You sacrificed your reputation to help me," he said with wonder in his voice. "Everyone here thinks you're a hero now, but for a while there, they all thought you were terrible." "I didn't care what they thought," Marcus said simply. "My brother nearly died from a diabetic episode when he was about your age because no one recognized the signs. I wasn't going to let that happen to you if I could prevent it." A young woman in the crowd who had been recording on her phone stepped forward. "I filmed everything," she said, looking embarrassed. "I was going to post it online to shame you for being a rude American. Now I feel horrible about it." "Don't feel bad," Marcus told her. "Actually, maybe you should post it. But tell the whole story. Let people know that sometimes what looks like one thing is actually something completely different." The paramedic who had been monitoring James's condition looked up from his equipment. "His blood sugar is stabilizing, but we still need to take him to the hospital for observation. Diabetic episodes can be unpredictable, and we want to make sure there are no complications." As they prepared to transport James to the ambulance, he reached out and grabbed Marcus's hand. "Thank you," he said with genuine emotion. You probably saved my life. I could feel myself getting weaker and weaker, but I couldn't break position. The training is so deeply ingrained. I would have stood there until I died rather than abandon my post. Marcus squeezed the young soldier's hand. That dedication is admirable, James, but your life is more important than any ceremony. Promise me that if this ever happens again, you'll speak up or step aside. There's no shame in taking care of your health. James nodded. Though it was clear the conflict between his training and his medical needs was something he would have to work through with his commanding officers. As the ambulance drove away, the crowd began to disperse, but many people lingered to talk to Marcus and Sarah. The transformation in their attitudes was remarkable. People who had been ready to see Marcus arrested were now shaking his hand and apologizing for their earlier judgments. Emma, who had been quiet and confused throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up. Daddy, why didn't you just tell everyone what you were doing from the beginning? Marcus knelt down to his daughter's level. Because sometimes, sweetheart, you have to do something that looks wrong in order to do what's right. If I had announced that James was sick, it might have embarrassed him or gotten him in trouble with his superiors. This way I could help him without anyone knowing he had a medical condition until it became obvious. The crowd had mostly dispersed now, but the impact of what they had witnessed would stay with them. Social media posts that had been prepared to mock an ugly American tourist were being rewritten to tell the story of an unexpected hero who sacrificed his reputation to save a young soldier's life. 3 hours later, Marcus, Sarah, and Emma sat in the waiting room of St. Mary's Hospital in London. They had followed the ambulance to make sure James was going to be okay, despite having planned to visit the Tower of London that afternoon. Emma was coloring in a book they had bought from the hospital gift shop, while Sarah held Marcus's hand tightly. "I'm so proud of you," Sarah whispered. "I had no idea what you were doing back there. I thought you had lost your mind." Marcus managed a weak smile. "For a minute there, I thought I had too. It's not easy acting like someone you're not, especially when everyone around you thinks you're being terrible." A doctor in blue scrubs approached them, clipboard in hand. "Are you the family who came in with James Mitchell?" "We're friends," Marcus said, standing up. "How is he doing?" "Much better, thanks to your quick action. His blood glucose levels are back to normal, and there don't appear to be any complications from the seizure. He's asking to see you if you'd like." They followed the doctor down a long corridor lined with patient rooms. James was in a bed near the window, looking much better than he had a few hours earlier. His color had returned to normal, and he was sitting up, talking quietly with a middle-aged woman who had the same eyes as him. "Marcus," James called out when he saw them enter. "Mum, this is the man I told you about. The one who saved my life." Mrs. Mitchell stood up and immediately enveloped Marcus in a hug. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "James told me everything that happened. I don't know how to thank you enough." "There's no need to thank me," Marcus replied, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, they wouldn't have," Mrs. Mitchell insisted. "Most people would have just stood there recording with their phones, hoping something interesting would happen. You recognized what was wrong and found a way to help. That takes special knowledge and courage." James looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that because of me. Having everyone think you were a terrible person just so you could help me. I feel awful about it." Emma, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, stepped forward with her coloring book. "I made this for you," she announced, tearing out a page and handing it to James. It was a drawing of a soldier in a red coat standing very straight and tall, with a big smile on his face. "That's beautiful." "Emma." "Thank you," James said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I'll hang it up in my room." Mrs. Mitchell sat back down beside her son's bed. "James has been struggling with managing his diabetes since he joined the Guards," she explained. "The irregular hours, the physical demands, the stress, it's all made it much harder to keep his blood sugar stable." "Have you talked to your commanding officers about it?" Sarah asked. James looked uncomfortable. "Not really. I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle the job. Being a Royal Guard is everything I've ever wanted to do. I was afraid they'd transfer me to a desk job or discharge me entirely." Marcus sat down in the chair across from James's bed. "Son, hiding a medical condition that could kill you isn't brave. It's dangerous. Not just for you, but for your fellow guards and the people you're supposed to protect. What if you had collapsed during a real security threat?" "I never thought about it that way," James admitted quietly. My brother Tommy is a firefighter, Marcus continued. When he was first diagnosed with diabetes, he was terrified he'd lose his job. But you know what happened? His department worked with him to create a management plan. They made sure he always had glucose tablets with him, trained his partners to recognize the signs of diabetic episodes, and adjusted his schedule when needed. He's been saving lives for 10 years now. James's eyes lit up with hope. Really? They didn't remove him from active duty? Not at all. They realized that his experience with diabetes actually made him better at his job in some ways. He could recognize medical emergencies in civilians that other firefighters might miss. Your condition doesn't have to end your career. It just needs to be managed properly. Mrs. Mitchell nodded enthusiastically. I've been trying to tell him the same thing for months, but he wouldn't listen to me. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A tall man in military uniform entered the room, his expression serious but not unkind. James immediately tried to sit up straighter in bed. At ease, Mitchell, the officer said. I'm Colonel Harrison, your commanding officer. I came as soon as I heard what happened. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. This was the moment when James might face consequences for his medical episode during an official ceremony. Sir, I can explain, James started, but Colonel Harrison held up a hand. There's nothing to explain, soldier. You had a medical emergency that you couldn't control. What concerns me is that you didn't inform your superiors about your condition. We can't help you manage something we don't know about. James looked down at his hands. I was afraid you'd discharge me, sir. Colonel Harrison's expression softened slightly. Mitchell, the Royal Guards have faced much more challenging situations than managing one soldier's diabetes. We've had guards with various medical conditions throughout our history. What we can't tolerate is a soldier putting himself and others at risk by hiding important information. He turned to Marcus and extended his hand. You must be the American who helped our young guard. I want to thank you for your quick thinking and your discretion in handling a potentially dangerous situation. Marcus shook the colonel's hand. I just did what anyone with a diabetic family member would do. The real hero here is James, who maintained his post despite feeling terrible. That kind of dedication is remarkable. Colonel Harrison nodded approvingly. Indeed it is. Mitchell, when you're released from hospital, we're going to work together to create a comprehensive management plan for your diabetes. You'll meet with our medical staff. We'll adjust your duty schedule as needed, and we'll make sure all your fellow guards know how to recognize and respond to diabetic episodes. Relief flooded James's face. You mean I can stay with the guards, sir? As long as you're honest about your condition and follow the medical protocols we establish, I see no reason why you can't continue serving with distinction. The Royal Guards need soldiers with your level of commitment. We just need to make sure you're safe while you serve. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone processed this positive turn of events. What had started as a potential career-ending medical emergency was turning into an opportunity for James to serve more safely and effectively. 6 months later, Marcus received an unexpected package at his construction site in Detroit. Inside was a formal invitation on expensive paper with the royal seal embossed at the top. James Mitchell was inviting the Thompson family back to London as his personal guests for a special ceremony. What do you think it's about? Sarah asked that evening as they sat around their kitchen table examining the invitation. Only one way to find out, Marcus replied, though he had a suspicion about what James might have planned. 3 weeks later, the Thompson family found themselves back at Buckingham Palace, but this time they were escorted past the tourist crowds to a private area reserved for special guests. James met them at the entrance looking healthy and confident in his perfectly pressed uniform. You came, he said, embracing Marcus warmly. I wasn't sure you'd be able to make the trip again so soon. We wouldn't miss it, Sarah replied. Though we're dying to know what this is all about. James grinned mysteriously. You'll see. But first, let me show you something. He led them to a small display case near the guard quarters. Inside was Emma's drawing of the soldier, now professionally framed, alongside a plaque that read, "In appreciation of the kindness of strangers and the power of compassion to bridge any divide." Emma gasped with delight. My picture. It's in a real museum. Not quite a museum, James laughed. But somewhere where all the guards can see it and remember that our job is about serving people, not just standing still. As they walked through the palace grounds, James explained how much his life had changed since that day. The medical team here has been incredible. My blood sugar is more stable than it's been in years. And you were right about talking to my commanding officers. They've been nothing but supportive. He pointed to a small device clipped to his belt. I have a continuous glucose monitor now that alerts me when my levels start to change. And all my fellow guards know what to look for and how to help if needed. I haven't had a single episode since that day. They were approaching a formal ceremony area where a small crowd had gathered. Marcus recognized some faces from that morning 6 months ago. Tourists who had witnessed the incident, other guards who had been on duty, even some of the security personnel who had been ready to arrest him. "James, what is this?" Marcus asked, suddenly feeling nervous. Before James could answer, Colonel Harrison appeared at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for a very special recognition ceremony. 6 months ago, a visitor to our palace demonstrated the kind of courage and compassion that represents the very best of human nature." Marcus felt his cheeks burning as he realized what was happening. "James, you didn't—" "I absolutely did," James replied firmly. "What you did deserves recognition." Colonel Harrison continued his speech, describing the events of that day, and how Marcus's quick thinking and selfless action had not only saved James's life, but had also led to improved medical protocols for all the guards. "Sometimes heroes don't look like what we expect them to look like," he said. "Sometimes they look like ordinary people doing extraordinary things when no one is watching, except their own conscience." As Marcus was called forward to receive a special commendation from the royal guards, he noticed that several people in the audience were wiping away tears. The young woman who had filmed the original incident stepped forward. "I wanted to apologize again," she said, "and to tell you that I did post the video but with the full story. It's been viewed over 2 million times, and most of the comments are about how it changed people's perspectives on judging others too quickly." An elderly British gentleman who had criticized Marcus that day also approached. "I learned something important that day about assumptions and appearances. I've been volunteering with a diabetes awareness organization ever since, trying to help people recognize the signs you saw in young James." During the reception that followed, Marcus found himself surrounded by people sharing their own stories of times they had misjudged situations or people. The incident had clearly resonated with many people beyond those who had witnessed it firsthand. Sarah watched her husband with pride as he talked with various guests, deflecting praise and trying to redirect attention to James's recovery and the improvements in medical support for all the guards. "He still doesn't see himself as a hero," she thought to herself. Emma, meanwhile, was having the time of her life being escorted around by James, who was treating her like a princess. She had made him promise to write to her about his adventures as a guard, and he had already sent 3 letters since their return to Detroit. As the ceremony wound down, Mrs. Mitchell approached Marcus one final time. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small wrapped package. Inside was a photo of James at his most recent medical checkup, giving a thumbs up to the camera with a note that read, "Still standing tall, thanks to you." On the flight back to Detroit, Emma fell asleep against her father's shoulder, clutching a small British flag that James had given her as a memento. Sarah took Marcus's hand and squeezed it gently. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Those few minutes when everyone thought you were terrible?" Marcus considered the question as he looked out at the clouds below. "Not for a second," he finally replied. "You know what I keep thinking about? All those people who were recording that day, ready to post videos making fun of what they thought was just another rude American tourist. But when they learned the truth, most of them changed their perspective completely. It's funny how quickly people can go from judgment to understanding," Sarah observed. "That's what gives me hope," Marcus said. "If people are willing to change their minds that quickly when they get the full story, maybe we're not as divided as we sometimes think we are." Back in London, James was finishing his evening shift, standing guard with the same dedication he had always shown, but now with the confidence that comes from knowing he was supported and safe. His glucose monitor showed normal levels, and he felt stronger than he had in months. As tourists walked by, some of them recognized him from the viral video that had spread across social media. But instead of the harassment he might have expected, people approached him with respect and curiosity about diabetes awareness. Several visitors had told him that seeing his story had prompted them to learn more about recognizing medical emergencies in their own communities. The incident had created ripple effects that continued to spread. Diabetes organizations in both Britain and America had used Marcus's story in their awareness campaigns. Military medical protocols had been updated not just for the royal guards but for armed forces around the world. Most importantly, dozens of people had shared their own stories of hidden medical conditions, finding courage in James's example to seek help and support. 3 years later, Marcus received another letter from London, but this time it wasn't from James. It was from a young woman named Rebecca who had been in the crowd that day as a teenager. She was now studying to become a paramedic, inspired by what she had witnessed. "I learned that day that heroes don't always announce themselves," she wrote. "Sometimes they just do what needs to be done, regardless of what other people think. That lesson changed the direction of my entire life." Marcus smiled as he read the letter in his kitchen, the same kitchen where he had first examined James's invitation years earlier. Emma, now 11 and much taller, was doing homework at the same table. "Dad, my teacher wants me to write about someone who influenced me," Emma said, looking up from her assignment. "Can I write about that day in London when you helped the guard?" "You can write about whatever you want, sweetheart," Marcus replied. "But if you write about that day, make sure you mention that sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to look like you're doing the wrong thing." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "And that you should never judge people until you know the whole story?" "Exactly," Marcus said, ruffling her hair. "And that everyone deserves help when they need it, even if they can't ask for it themselves." As Emma returned to her homework, Marcus reflected on how one moment of recognition, one decision to act despite the social cost, had created connections and changes that were still reverberating years later. He had gone to London as a tourist hoping to make memories for his family. Instead, he had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see what others are missing, and have the courage to act on that knowledge. James continued to serve with distinction in the Royal Guards, his diabetes well managed and his story inspiring other service members to be open about their medical needs. The friendship between a construction worker from Detroit and a Royal Guard from London had bridged not just an ocean, but the assumptions and prejudices that too often keep people from truly seeing each other. In the end, Marcus's moment of apparent rudeness had revealed a profound truth, that compassion sometimes requires courage, understanding often demands action, and the most heroic thing you can do is help someone when no one else realizes they need help.